When auteur theory started, it was used as a way to have cinema be taken more seriously as an artistic medium. Like painting, literature, or music, giving a theory to establish who was the author, artist, or the main creative voice behind a movie, and the director makes the most sense, I guess, to say is the true author or artist or auteur of a movie, to make more understandable to other artistic mediums and how we viewed art at the time. Now, obviously, movies aren't really like painting, literature, or music. It's a different medium, and establishing a theory that reflects how we understand other artistic mediums was applied, having there be an artist. It argues that the director is always the main artist and voice behind almost any movie of note, or i.e. any good movie. Now, my own views differ from this, and you can watch the last Deep Focus where I talk about what auteur theory is, but auteur theory from its beginnings has always been a tad problematic. Both the essays that helped establish auteur theory, A Certain Tendency in French Cinema by Francois Truffaut, and Andrew Sarris with his essay Notes on the Auteur Theory, favor certain directors over the other. In fact, both actually make lists in both essays about who they consider to be the real auteurs of their day. Now, most film fans and cinephiles make lists of their favorite directors, it's fairly normal, but to establish certain directors, whether they be Hitchcock, Wells, or Renoir, as better and as important artists just because they are auteurs is very problematic, and takes a policy on understanding who authored and whose creative voice is in a film into who is important in film is a bit odd and more about hierarchy for the movies than understanding the movies. It basically makes a class system where the directors of note and quality are the real auteurs, making auteur theory more of a cinematic class system than a policy. Auteur theory can even favor directors over the movies themselves. Truffaut used to quote in an interview about auteur theory,
qui disait « Il n'y a pas de pièces de théâtre, il n'y a que des auteurs ». Giraudoux voulait dire il y a le bloc Claudel, le bloc Giraudoux, le bloc Molière, le reste, les pièces. Une pièce réussie par hasard n'a pas d'intérêt, c'était ça l'idée.
This really is the problem everyone has always had with auteur theory, that certain directors are better directors simply because they are directors of note or of substance, so they are auteurs. And if you are not one of those directors, you are not in the auteur club. In Sarris's essay, he puts one director above another, making it sound like these are the directors we take seriously and the others not as much so, like when he disregards Billy Wilder and then praises Douglas Sirk. Both of these men are great directors, but do we really need to say one is better than the other? And what does it say about auteur theory that both of its founding essays have these kind of ideas in them? It establishes this idea that a true auteur is a grand artist and a great filmmaker, when really it's just a way to establish an artist or artistic voice through a movie. It's a policy to help understand what artistic voice or voices come through a movie and all movies, not just the movies you like and consider to be better. You can use auteur theory to understand a great filmmaker, but auteur theory does not only apply to great filmmakers. The hierarchy that auteurism created became popular throughout New Hollywood, with directors like Coppola, Altman, Bogdanovich, Kubrick, Spielberg, Scorsese, and George Lucas, and especially the baby boomers and how they understand cinema as an art form, and really most future generations would as well, making what Truffaut and Sarris established as the established way for being a serious cinephile. You can't be considered a serious filmgoer unless you hold Paul Thomas Anderson up here and Paul W.S. Anderson down there, making a large part of what auteur theory is a class system. Paul Thomas Anderson has a voice and Paul W.S. Anderson doesn't. Whether you like the Resident Evil movies or not has nothing to do with whether or not a noticeable artistic voice is there. But let's say you did that and only watch the important auteur directors, as you'd say, the auteurs of note of their time. Is that even a good way to talk about cinema? Well, Take Quentin Tarantino, obviously one of our main auteurs right now, as you would say. There is no denying if you were to talk about a major director of our day, you'd bring him up. But then if you were only just watching established auteur filmmakers, how could you understand him? Most of his influences come from blaxploitation or Grindhouse or Sergio Corbucci, none of which would be considered directors or films of note at their time. You'd be handicapping yourself for really no good reason other than a bizarre class system that has more to do with hierarchy than the actual understanding of cinema. And the same goes with a lot of the new Hollywood directors whose influences range from John Ford to Ingmar Bergman to drive-in monster movies. Auteur theory was created to elevate cinema as an art form, to help people take cinema more seriously. And in its time, it did that. But it also established an ugly and narrow-minded precedent, one that doesn't help the movies in the long run. I've loved movies for a long time, and when I first got into movies, this helped guide me to figure out what to get into. But after a while, I realized I needed to broaden my horizons beyond what directors were of note. It's a fine idea if you're trying to get into cinema, but don't let it define your taste. And for too many, it has. We have too many film fans using their training wheels after years and years and acting like that's a normal way to ride a bike 20 years later. Art isn't that easy or easy to understand. You can just make lists and theories to find out about movies and different kinds of movies, but they're not there as some checklist as to what makes a good or great movie or movie maker. Truffaut, in his essay, A Certain Tendency in the French Cinema, talks a lot about in French cinema at the time he wrote that essay, he didn't like that they just filmed versions of established French literature, that this tradition of quality that the real auteurs needed to break out of. In a way, Truffaut and Serres made their own tradition of quality in the way we understand film, and it's probably been more long-lasting than any tradition of quality that Truffaut was complaining about before. To use a theory that makes certain directors better than others is more about having a hierarchy for the sake of having one than saying anything about the movies. In a time when we have more access to more movies than ever before in the history of the entire medium, it's really limiting to only talk about important directors. And even making the recent vulgar auteur category is just making another hierarchy to fight the problems with the previous hierarchy. It's like we only have one way to understand how to read cinema or something. At the time when auteur theory came about, home video hadn't even happened yet. So the access to movies was less, and seeing movies of only the important directors, I guess, made a little more sense. We don't really need a theory that's going to hold us back and talk more about an established canon list of directors more than the policy, which is what auteur theory really is when we boil it down. Everyone has an established list of their favorite directors. I mentioned William Wellman and Justin Lin in my last video, but I was showing how I read them as auteurs, what makes them unique and distinctive as directors and creative voices. Not saying Michael Bay sucks, he made a tradition of quality, and that's why Justin Lin is the best. Auteur theory, bitch, fuck you. Art and film doesn't need an easy answer. It probably didn't at the time, but it really doesn't now. We just need a policy to understand who made it and whose voice is coming through, and to understand the patterns through their previous work. That's really all auteur theory should be, and what it should be used for. If you need a hierarchy to understand art and movies, then have fun with your lists, but I'd much rather try to understand who and why each movie itself is what it is. You can see the voice of cinematographers, screenwriters, actors, costume designers, and editors if you understand enough about cinema. But if you're still sitting around thinking Orson Welles is the only reason Citizen Kane is great, I bet you still think all that movie's about is a sled named Rosebud. I'm Jim Gisriel, and this was Deep Focus.